All right. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law, chapter 46. Chapter 46, and we're up to paragraph 23. Siman Mem Daled, Sif Chav Gimel, chapter 46, paragraph 23. Okay. So we'll just give a small introduction. In slang, just in colloquialism, anything that's not kosher we call treif. But that's not the technical definition. It's just how we use the word in conversation. The technical definition of treif is an animal or bird that it's got an injury or a sickness or disease of some sort that it will not live 12 months. So let's just made up example. Let's say it has a heart condition. And animals generally they only survive if, let's say, a few months, 2-3 months with this heart condition. So even if you shecht the animal now, while it was still alive, since it's not going to naturally live for 12 months, that's called a treifa. Or it got an injury. Treifa literally means torn. So a wolf attacked the sheep and it's severely injured, still alive, but it's not going to live long term. It's not going to, it's only got a few days or something or whatever it is. And a person shechts it while it's still alive, you're not allowed to eat it. It's called the treifa. So any animal that's not going to live for for 12 months, naturally, obviously, we're not prophets. You can't look at an animal and prophetically know where this animal is going to live for 12 months. But in other words, either we see an injury or after we shecht it, what we do is we inspect various internal organs, different things. If we see something, or we're aware of something that the animal's not going to live 12 months, so even though it was shechted properly, you're still not allowed to eat it. Okay, that's called a treif or a treif. That's how it is. Just side point to this interesting story with the Baal Shem Tov. Someone came to him for a blessing. The doctors had given up hope on him. He had a certain lung condition, and so he told him that he should move to Israel. He should move to Israel. He said in Poland, the Jewish law follows the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, who was the outstanding Torah scholar of that part of the world. Said in Israel, they follow the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef. So you should go there, and if with an animal that had the same condition, the Ramah says it won't live 12 months. It's a treifa, and the Beis Yosef says it will live. So it's not a treifa. So he says go to Israel where they follow the Beis Yosef, and you'll live a long time. So he goes there and he recovered. Now, as much as we would like to take that as a lovely miracle story, and it could be it is to a certain extent, but sometimes when we have differences of opinion in halacha, it's to do with facts on the ground. So such a lung disease, I'm not sure exactly what they have. It's not handed down the story. If a person lived in Poland with the cold winter, with the snow, person did not survive the winter. But in Israel, which was a Mediterranean climate, or possibly in Jerusalem, was a dry desert, relatively speaking, an animal and also a person would survive because the climate has a difference. So what you find sometimes many differences. I was just using this to illustrate the idea of a treifa, but just as a side point, you see sometimes the difference in halacha between halachic authorities has to do with the facts on the ground where they actually lived, etc. Okay, so for those who just joined us, chapter 46, number 23. The pomim, sometimes what happens when people have chickens, Daikim oif kofus. They take their chicken tied up. They tie it up. Mashlichim oisai arza, and they throw it onto the ground. And this stuns it. V'achakach, and afterwards shachatim oisai, they shecht it. Says the halacha for Issa Gomo. This is totally forbidden. You're not allowed to do that. Okay, now in this chapter, we're only talking about the effect it has on the kashrus of the animal. You're not allowed to do that also for another reason. That's Sar Chaim. That's unwarranted cruelty to animals. Why do you need to take a chicken and bang it on the ground to make it easier to deal with? So that we have in a different chapter. You can't do that. In this chapter, we're just talking about the kashrus aspect, because this chapter is just on the laws of kashrus. And we find that often, sometimes there can be multiple factors in something, and you'll find one factor in one chapter, and one factor in another chapter, because you just want to keep everything on topic to be able to make it easy to find and digest. But in the kashrus aspect, what's the problem with doing that? Because an animal or a bird that fell, in other words, it hit the ground hard, it can't be permitted until you can see that it can walk properly 4 amos, approximately 6 feet, on its own. Because we're worried if you've banged its head or it's got an injury, it's become a treifa. It's not going to live. The gam bekvasim, and this, so it's not only chickens, although that was what was done. Again, not saying by Jewish people, but this, because you're not allowed to do it. But that's what was done in society as a whole. It was quite common with chickens. But the same thing, the gam, this also applies with kvasim, with sheep, with golim and calves. You have to be very careful about this, right? And this is the part of the issue when we're talking about, there's certain places where the government wants you to stun animals, to put electric shock into it before you shecht it, different things. So besides the cruelty to animal things of, I don't know if people have ever been to an abattoir, where they butcher animals and different things. Now, chita, thank God I've never been shechted, and I'm not planning on trying it out, God willing. But the way it works, shchita, the knife is so sharp and smooth. I don't know if I'm sure everyone's had the experience of getting a paper cut. Feel it afterwards, but at the time of the paper cut, sometimes you don't feel it because it's like a smooth incision. So the shchita the knife is designed to be like that. It's this smooth, thin, and it's one motion. And in that one motion, they sever the blood and oxygen supply to the brain. So although animals don't die instantly, but they very quickly lose consciousness because there's no blood and no oxygen going to the brain. So that's how Hashem said we should shecht animals. You go to these places and they say, oh, that's cruelty. The different government places, put an electric shock to its head instead. And half the times you see it doesn't work. In America, where there's a larger kosher market, a lot of the companies have their own abattoir, their own schlachthuis, their own place where they shecht animals. But in Australia, there's not a large enough kosher market. And normally what they do is they rent out part of a general abattoir. And sometimes you go there and you see what's happening in the other part of the place. And all these people who want to turn around and give criticism to Shchita, Chas v'shalom, besides the fact that they're essentially saying that they know better than God, and they think they have a better system, which that in itself is ridiculous. But it's terrible what happens in these places. No, the kosher system is by far the greatest. But anyway, that's so an animal that's been thrown or has hit the ground hard. It has to be able to walk on its own feet comfortably in its normal walk, not groggy. Otherwise, we worried it's a treifa. Okay, soft daled, number 24. Now, the Mei Hakayets in summer, shchiach ma'oid bavar avzois. It's very common that geese shnimsu bois katanas k'miyabelas b'vnei mamayim, that they get these blisters that look like warts on their intestines. And the problem is that these warts can block the intestines or cause them to puncture, and that's going to make the goose a treifa, because a bird, or animal also, but in this case the bird with the punctured intestine, it's not going to live 12 months, or if the intestine's blocked. So harbor treifas al yedekach. Now there can be many treifas, many different types of issues can happen because of this. Therefore, a person has to be very careful after they shecht the geese. They have to check the intestines. And when they find these small blisters, they have to go ask halachic authority. So today, all this is done before it's sold, to the consumer. This is done in the meat processing place. People don't normally kasher their own animals so much anymore. Although we have on occasion, we shechted a goat in our family and kashered it and different things, and done all the checking and the trading ourselves, and done chickens a few times. But generally speaking, it doesn't. This normally all happens before you buy it. Okay. Now we're finishing with animals, and we're coming to a new topic, number 25. So the topic is going to be, again, just give a little introduction, is you can't make dairy bread. I mean, technically you could, it's possible to do. And according to the Torah, it's not a problem. But there's a rabbinic injunction, there's a rabbinic rule that you shouldn't make dairy bread. Now, of course, you can take regular bread and you can put cheese on it and it becomes a dairy sandwich. But we mean when you're actually like in the dough, putting milk or dairy into the dough. Because since bread, at least till recent times, was eaten with every meal, if a person has dairy bread in the house and they have meat, it's an accident waiting to happen. So number 25, ein loshen isa b'cholov. You shouldn't knead milk into the dough, either together with water or addition to water. Shouldn't knead it in. Why? Because shema yochel pasim aposa. Maybe you'll forget and you'll eat this bread with meat, which of course has big problems. So you can't. So in the first instance, you're not allowed to do it. The imlash, and if someone did do it, either they forgot or on purpose, kol hapas osa, this bread is forbidden to eat. They transgressed a rabbinic prohibition. They're not allowed to eat it. Afil achlavadoi, even to eat it by itself without any other food, right? Even after the fact, you can't just sit down and eat that bread roll. Forbidden. Okay. So why? Gezeira. It's a decree, rabbinic decree. Shema yochlo imbosa. Maybe this dairy bread will become to be eaten with meat. Now, vim hayadavamut. If a person made a very small amount, that there's only made enough for one meal, one time. So they made one little bread roll. Then, or there's another way that someone can make dairy bread. The other option is to shinatsuras apas, change the shape, make it in a funny shape. So a person might, for example, use I'll just make up an example, a triangle mold, triangle bread pan. So they know the triangle bread is always dairy, right? Normally the bread pan's rectangular, and so if you make it in the same type of bread pan, it'll be make a problem. Or they braid like colors, these kinds of things. It's the dairy bread will look like any other bread. But if they make it in some type of funny, unusual shape, then it becomes a sign. It's an obvious sign that's recognizable that you can't eat this bread with meat. Mutter, that you're allowed to do. Now, this isn't only making dairy bread. V'chein hadin, the same thing applies. It's the same halacha. Imlosh issa in shuman shabosa. If you kneaded dough with gravy or schmaltz, you need to make it into a special shape. That you know that this is a meat, a bread, so you're not going to come to eat it with cheese or other dairy. Similarly, vein lafa shum pas im paldin or pashtido betana. A person should not bake any bread in an oven. With pladin is like a dairy-filled loaf, and pashtida is like a meat-filled loaf. Right? So in other words, mean like this. Let's say you have a Arif piece of bread, Arif loaf of bread. Now, you could bake it technically in a meat oven, be on its own tray. But if there's some type of, here we're talking about a meat-filled bread or pastry in the same oven, that's a problem. Or if you baked the parv bread in a dairy oven, again, in its own tray, its own, say, foil container, and the oven's clean, different things, technically it's okay. But if you've got a cheese-filled pastry or bread also in the oven at the same time, it's a problem. Now, what could be the problem? The problem is the chashinan shemiyazov min achema min shuman tachas. When you cook this cheese-filled or meat-filled bread, what happens is some of the butter or the gravy, if it's meat, oozes out. Like you make a pizza, and some of the cheese goes on the it oozes off a little bit or something, and it might become absorbed into the other bread. Now, let's say ve'im zav tachtov, if someone did do it, and it did ooze, dinakil nilish imoy, then we have to consider it. So if it was a piece of bread in with the dairy dish, we now have to consider this loaf of bread dairy. Or if it was bread and in the oven was this meat dish, we now have to consider this bread fleishik, it's meat. The asal achla filovadoy, in which case you're not even allowed to eat it on its own because it doesn't have the special shape. It's forbidden to eat. So in a nutshell, people don't. If you make dairy bread, it has to be its a special shape. I know someone who makes dairy bread from time to time, and they put blue food coloring in it. So when they knead it and everything, they have this like sky blue bread, right? That's the dairy bread. Personally, the look of it doesn't appeal to me, but that would also be recognizable. Okay. The next law, we're going to go one step more, is that we can't cook meat and dairy in the same oven. Because the steam or it's not just steam, there's like there's steam that comes off something when you cook it. It gets hot, it boils, and they can intermix with each other and becomes a problem. So, number 26. Pas she'afoy imetzli betone echad. Bread that was baked in the same oven with roasting meat at the same time. Se'im haya tano sosum v'atzli megula. If the oven was sealed, like our ovens are sealed, they're closed. You don't have everything coming out. And the meat was uncovered. So you got a roast in a baking dish. And elsewhere in the oven, even if it's a very big oven, there's some bread. Then also pasa achal b'cholov. You can no longer eat this bread together with meat, with dairy. Sorry, you can no longer eat this meat with dairy. Sorry, I keep saying the wrong word. There was meat in the oven and bread also in the oven. So since they were cooked together, you can't use that bread for dairy because we're worried that as the meat was cooking, there's steam, there's the juices of the meat, and it's moved. It's gone around the oven. And especially those who wear glasses, you'll understand this. You open the oven to check, and straight away the steam comes and it clouds up your glasses. Right, that's the steam that comes out of the food that we're talking about, and so that could go in. That goes into the bread that's cooking there. However, imatzli haya mechusa, if the roasted meat was covered, and we have to mean really covered, that nothing can come out. So it's sealed. Oisha tana b'suach, tana godol ketun mishalonu, or it was a very large open oven. You had an oven with a big air vent that everything comes out, which our ovens are not like that because that will let the heat out. But they did have, they used to have wood burning ovens, so they would have very, allow all the smoke and everything, so it had very good ventilation. So if you had that and it was very large, then mutter, then it would be permissible because any steam that's going to come off the meat is going to go out the ventilation, and it's a big enough space. The bread's far enough away; it's not going to be a problem. And so you could still use that. You could still consider that bread arv. Of course, we're assuming the oven was all clean and there's no remnants spilt there from the previous cooking that now the bread's touching. But theoretically. So even though that theoretically would work, Mikol Mokim nevertheless, the Chatchila Yesh Lazar Shel Litzais Basa B'Tan She'ofen Bypass. Person should be careful. They should not bake meat in an oven where they bake bread. Because as you said, although it could work, again, it's an accident waiting to happen. Because we're worried that the moisture, the gravy, the juice, when you put it from the meat, will flow and it will go onto the bread. Even when the meat is in its own roasting pan, we should still be concerned about this because, it's an accident waiting to happen. Number 27. Now we have an oven that either you're cooking meat there or cooking dairy there. Either way, we've had a spill. And so some of the meat juice, the gravy, or melted cheese or butter or something has spilt. It's on the floor of the oven or the sides. It's splattered, it oozed, it dripped, whatever it is. So, sarach hesek din. Now we have to heat it up to the point if we want to use it for bread or something. Right, so let's let's step back a step and let's talk about koshering. So koshering, we say the way to take out the flavor that's been absorbed in something, it goes out of a pot or an oven or whatever's absorbed in, the same way it goes in. Whatever method puts it in, that same method will take it out. So let's use a simple example. A person boiled, a corned beef, let's say, a piece of meat. They boiled a piece of meat in a pot. So how did the meat absorb into the pot, the taste of meat? Through hot water. So how do you kasher it? You kasher it through immersing it in boiling water. Obviously, it has to be perfectly clean first. We also meant to make sure it has been used 24 hours after it's been cleaned, because after 24 hours, the flavors absorb, spoil a little bit, so it helps with the koshering. So that takes out. Now, I'm not suggesting this oversimplification I'm giving now. That doesn't give everyone a license to do koshering, right? This is just a simple general overview, right? You want to check what can be koshered and how to kosher and different things. But so that was something that the flavor absorbed through a liquid. If it absorbed through heat, so here we're talking about an oven. We give an example, it was an oven, and you were cooking something and something splattered or spilt in the oven. And so how did it get absorbed into the walls or the floor of the oven? Was through fire. So the only way to kasher that oven is to burn out that flavor. That's called libum. So he's saying that you have to put coals on all the surfaces, and you get the coals white hot. And if we're talking about like the ovens of the past, the stone ovens and the people had and the wood burning, that's how you would do it. So today it depends what type of oven you have. Now, if you have a self-clean feature on your oven, generally that's good enough. That really burns anything away. If it's from not kosher, often what people do is they run it through the self-clean cycle 3 times. Sometimes you have to have a gap in between. It won't do multiple times one after the other because of the heat. But the first time will like burn away anything that was stuck there, any remnants of non-kosher, and then you sweep it out, whatever, and then just turns it to ashes, and then so self-clean. Most poskim say that gets hot enough, so you could do that. To catch with coals like this, I had to do once. I was in a camp. I had these pizza ovens. It was rather dangerous, but it worked. I asked the person in charge of the camp to get the pre-treated coals, so you just put the match in it and it goes. But he found it was cheaper to buy regular coals and lighter fluid, which didn't help too much because it was really hard to get it going. It was ridiculous that we did it, but when we're young, we do these things. And luckily we survived. But literally, I was like standing in the walk-in freezer, shooting lighter fluid into the oven with the coals, and as it's going whoosh, closing the door of the walk-in freezer, so we didn't get hit by the flames. It was if it wasn't so dangerous, actually would have been, it was comical. But so try not to do it that way. I don't recommend that. But it worked. It was koshered. By the time the coals went out the next day, very primitive, but it worked. Okay, today sometimes they use blowtorches, depends what the surface is. Depends how powerful the blowtorch is also. but there are cleverer ways to do it. Okay. Now, we were talking about a treifa with animals. All of a sudden, we started talking about bread and ovens, and now we're going back to treifas with injuries to the animals. I don't know why the author had the little pause in there. Maybe it was just so it's more interesting. We're not bogged down in one topic. Maybe that's why. It's a long chapter. So number 28, we're going back to a potential treifa. So he says like this. People, it's the norm, people eat chickens that have been castrated. And what should be the problem? Well, first of all, you're not allowed to castrate animals. A Jew's not allowed to do that. It's a prohibition to castrate any animals. You can't even have a non-Jew castrate your animals for you. So a lot of people, they like having pets and different things that they're not able to breed. So I mean, there's different ways that some people get around it. They gift it to a non-Jew who does the process themselves and gives it back. I'm not sure how reliable all these things are, but anyway, in the first instance, you can't do this. But let's say someone bought a chicken, bought a rooster, and it's been castrated. So the potential problem is that we have a concern that the intestines might have been punctured when they made the incision, right? Because in the roosters, it's not completely outside the body like it is by other animals. Why? So why do we allow it to be eaten? We're presuming that the non-Jew who castrated this animal was an expert. And therefore he didn't want to cause any damage to intestines while stitching the incision. And since he doesn't want to do it, and he's an expert, we're relying on the fact that he did it right. So that's in the first instance. If we find any problem, even if it's not lying in the right place, the intestines, that is, the chicken is prohibited. So what we do is, as long as everything looks all right, we can rely that an expert did it and didn't cause any problems. So soon as we see any issue with the stitching, with the intestines, with anything, we're going to say, forget it. Okay. Number 29. Not many questions today. Number 29. Mixas Mekaimus. In some places, Nahagim Akam Amfatim Avazis Lamachim Israel. People fatten up the geese to sell them to Jews. So generally, I don't know, we don't really eat too many geese today. I don't know, anyone ever had goose? I don't think I've ever had goose. Yeah, Mordechai, you had goose? Is it good?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. I mean, I've had duck, had chicken. Don't think I've ever had don't think we ever had goose, but it was more common.
But giraffe.
No, I haven't had a giraffe yet. Though it is on the bucket list. But well, my Zeta, he used to raise poultry. It's kosher poultry. So they used to have geese. So, but he said they use like the watchdogs. Apparently the geese are very territorial, very loud, and quite vicious if anyone or anything invades their territory. So that's what they had. But anyway, so they used to fatten the geese. So what they do, they would puncture them beneath the wings with a needle or something, Why? Kadesh is tapich abosa v'yisar shemenis. It makes them swell, makes their body swell, and it makes them look fat. So again, unfortunately, we're talking about people torturing animals. So besides the kashrus issue, a Jew can't do this, Sarba l'chaim, but they would injure the animal essentially to make it swell, so it looked like a plump animal, plump bird, so they could get a higher price. V'yesh b'zeh shas chachim and kashrus oloi. So if someone buys such a bird, they have to take it to the rabbi. I mean, again, today everything's been done pre-sold to consumer, but if people are shechting themselves, they have to take it to someone who's an expert in checking the inside organs of the birds, because it could be this puncture has caused an injury that's going to make the animal a treif. Now he mentions geese because that was the norm in that part of the world at the time. But then he says v'chein behema. The same thing would apply if it happened to an animal. It's not just birds. If there was some type of similar process done to an animal, there's the same potential issues. Mr. Kenneth. And he says sometimes it's because of excess eating. What they do is they force feed the animals. They stuff them. Again, to make them get as fat as possible in a short time. And they don't let the animals walk and different things. And again, we have a concern of the intestines being punctured, of exploding. But for Wasa, Shadarkim Oisam Atseya Neged Akaris. So the way to fix the situation is they pierce the abdomen with a awl opposite the stomach, and that relieves the swelling. So, but that can also cause kashrus problems. So yesh v'zeh gam ken shas chachim im hayek kshera. So the same thing, a person has to show this to a rabbinic authority if they want to eat this animal, and have it all checked out. All right. So we finished, for the time being at least, the trephis. We're going to go another topic. Any question on these animals, different things? Just by the way, today the biggest issue is there are certain conditions that an animal is not going to live 12 months. They have certain health issues. And in mainstream farming, what they do is they pump them up with antibiotics and other sort of medications, and this gets them through. So theoretically, live. Now, halachically, it doesn't. Even though we say a certain condition, this condition, typically an animal does live 12 months. Typically, an animal doesn't live. We don't care whether the actual animal lived or not. We say this condition makes it a treifa, this condition doesn't. It's not a treifa. So if they pumped it up with all kinds of medications and they got it to live artificially for however long, we're still going to call it a treifa. So although kashrus is not to do with health, right? There's plenty of kosher food that's not so healthy, and there's plenty of healthy food that's not necessarily kosher. But when it comes to meat, the animals, on the whole, the kosher meat is much more healthier animals than the non-kosher, because A, we exclude animals of certain conditions and injuries, and B, they're also not pumped up with all the medications because it's not going to help the kosher animals. It's not going to help its kashrus, so they don't do it. And there are some people who actually buy kosher meat primarily because of the antibiotics and different things they put into the animals, because it has a flow-on effect potentially to the people who eat it. So there's actually a non-Jewish, non-kosher, like one of these health sort of boutique sort of butchers. So one of their main suppliers is is so in the kosher animals, generally speaking, we don't eat the hind quarter because once you would remove the sciatic nerve, the gidanosha, and you take out the chaylev and fats you have, there's very little meat left. So what happens is it's incredibly labor intensive to remove all the things you're not allowed to eat, and you end up with such a small amount of meat. It's not viable, and many places they've lost the expertise even how to do it. Yeah. So you have a question?
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
question. Can I
Yeah.
ask?
Yes. Yes.
You mentioned that boiling meat is usually helping at least to get rid of some of the unknown toxins or whatever, whether it's not strep. Um, what do you think about frozen food, frozen meat? Does it
Okay, so I was
give it
actually
the
talking
same
about
effect or
boiling
not?
the pot afterwards. If
Oh,
something
boiling the
not
pot.
kosher got boiled in it, you boil the pot, take it out. If something's frozen, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, generally speaking, there's obviously advantages to having something as fresh as possible, but in a certain way. But there's advantages to freezing also. I mean, I'm not going to comment on the on the health aspect. I'm not sure I'm the one qualified, but
Mm-hmm.
frozen meat should really be kashered before it's frozen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
No, but just
that's
in order
yeah.
to prevent if it is something that it's unknown,
Yeah,
that
well, there are certain
something that
things that they'll die. That's right. They'll die in the if it's frozen. Yeah.
Okay. And the
So,
second question is, most of the time these days, when they raise chicken, it's usually less than 12 months, and they're usually sold or
oh yeah. They check them way before 12 months, but I'm saying if
right.
then when they checked it, let's say they checked it at 3 months, but then they see in the stomach or the lungs or the something there's an issue that
No, but
if
the
they hadn't
rule
have
of
checked it, it
Mhm.
wouldn't live. Then it's considered a treifa.
Okay, that's it. It's not really breaking the rules if you know that ahead of time that it is a normal, healthy bird, but it will be killed in a matter of 3, 4 months. It will not survive
Yeah,
for
but
the
that's
next
because
12.
but it's not going to die. It just happens to be you
Right,
shechted it.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, okay. Thank you.
yeah, no
Thank you.
problems. So this boutique butcher. So what happens is most places where they shecht, they just sell the hindquarter, right? They have a supplier or someone they supply, and they just sell the whole thing to the non-Jewish market, and that just makes it easier. So there's this place, and they particularly made a contract with the kosher supplier because they wanted to get the animals that were healthier and weren't pumped up with antibiotics. So not that we need side benefits of kashrus. The fact that Hashem tells us that it's good for us, we know it's good, but it ends up being a side benefit here. All right, number 30. Some people they preserve fruit, right? To make like jams and jellies and different things. So it used to be far more common that people did it themselves. Today, normally most are bought commercially, but it used to be you got certain berries or fruits when they're in season. That was it. You didn't get again until next year. Today in the supermarket, they got them from all over the world, and you can pretty much buy anything all year round. Could be it's more expensive, but everything's available. But it used to be, people they harvest whatever they had. You ate what you did for the few weeks or whatever that was available, and the rest you preserved, made into some type of jelly or something. You made something. So they preserve fruit. Shnoisem es a they put the fruit into some type of jar. And then what they do is they seal the mouth of the jar with an animal's womb. That's what they used to do. Now, I think today when we seal jars, we have a better system, right? There's a lot of different you can buy things at the stores, to seal your jars. But in those days, that's what they did. They used to use an animal's womb to seal the container. And then some of these preserves have to be heated, and they would heat it in a hot oven with this animal part on it. That's how they preserve. They did this to preserve the fruit. So if someone does this, first of all, you have to be careful that it's from a kosher animal, the womb, right? It's from a kosher animal meaning kosher species, and was shechted. And the hochshe gamba melicha v'dacha koroi. It has to be properly soaked, salted, and rinsed before it's used. Right? Now, it could mean that there's these preserves shouldn't be eaten with dairy. That's a side issue. But if we're going to have a womb from an animal, a non-kosher animal, or one that wasn't kashered, so it has blood in it, it's going to affect it won't be kosher, the preserved fruit. So I can't say I've ever seen anyone do this nowadays. Use an animal womb to seal their jars, but seemingly it was reasonably common. Okay, 31. The Eiros Naharash Mukzakim Sheish Mayhem Toloim. Certain wells and rivers, it's established that the water contains worms. Again, today we're actually quite privileged, to have, at least, I'm not saying everyone on earth, but at least I think where all of us live, we have clean water on tap, relatively speaking, and we take it for granted. Even then, sometimes we filter our water, we might drink bottled water, different things, but the quality of water that comes out of the tap, even in a place where we prefer to drink bottled water, relative to times past, it's very high quality. And there used to be certain places where the water source they had a well, and this well had worms. So what do you do? Asa lishtoisam ad shinasa oisam. You can't drink the water until you've strained it. Vafil b'diavad in bishul b'oisam mayim. Even after the fact, if you cooked something in that water, yesh l'asa, it's not kosher, because we're worried that there's worms, and that's now been absorbed into the food. Also, you can't use this water to soak your meat in before you kasher it. Or to rinse any food. Because what happens is the worms cling to the food or even go into it. So won't spend too much time on it, but it's a concern. Mordechai.
Yeah, isn't there that thing about copepods in New York City water?
Yeah. Okay. So since you mentioned, so there was
Yeah, so we have
least
we have a filter
filter
just in
yeah.
case it's true.
Right. So there was a concern that there were certain bugs in the New York water supply. First of all, there was a bit of a rabbinical dispute about it, whether they're actually sort of microscopic or they're really large enough and different things. But as Mordechai said, people, many people, so most people, they either already had or they installed some type of filter just to be on the safe side, and that made sure that it didn't pass through. So that was the strain that we have here. The same idea, right? It's but they had. I mean, people sometimes lived in places, and maybe it's still the case in certain third world countries. There's like really worms, not just things that you can't see. The water is there's actually halacha because people used to draw water from wells and different things, and from the rivers. You're not allowed to take water at night. I mean, you can take water at night. Rephrase that. You can't take the water and drink it outdoors at night. Right? You could bring it to your house and it's lit up and you can check it, because it could even be in the water. There could be mental block. They look like slugs. They suck your blood. What are they called?
Leeches.
Leeches. That's it. I don't know why I just had a mental block. So yeah, it could be leeches, no, it could be anything. Right? So a person should be, so it's not a kashrus halacha. We also are going to learn a chapter later. There's a whole chapter on things that we can't do because it's dangerous, because you have a mitzvah to look after ourselves. And this is one of the things. You can't take water in the dark. I mean, I think from our taps, if we have it's all filth and different things, it's reasonably safe. But from the wild, we'll call it, you can't take water from the wild, from a well, and where you can't see it and then drink it. Okay. Number 32. Swan mesamayim. When you strain the water, you have to be careful to strain it through a cloth. The cloth has to be thick enough, or the weaving, the holes enough to be small enough that even tiny worms can't pass through. Right? There's no point straining it into something that the little worms will go through, just like the water. Has to be. You have to make sure you do a good job. Okay, 33. Chaimetz sheslia, vinegar that became wormy. Asa yedei sinon, even if you strain it, you're not allowed to use that vinegar. I mean, I'm not sure that I want to use vinegar that I saw worms in, even if I could strain it. But today, Baruch Hashem, we live higher standard of living, and we can be very choosy about our food and different things. So people were poorer, and they had to make do what they had to a certain extent. But even if you strain vinegar, it doesn't help. Why? Because the worms that develop in vinegar, at least at some stage in their life, are incredibly tiny. And they'll pass through any cloth. Now, maybe there's some type of commercial filters they have today that might do a better job. But the way they used to filter through a cloth in those days, it didn't help. I was sitting in Gurugare, and as a matter of fact, straining it made it worse. The type of the sun, it's better not to strain it at all. Why? Because a worm that develops in a liquid, in a vessel, it's not, well, it depends what type of worm. It's not necessarily forbidden until it comes out of the liquid. Right? There's sinum, but through straining it, there's a concern that it's separated from the liquid while you were straining it, and then went back in. So if someone has wormy vinegar, the best thing to do is boil up the vinegar, and then strain it. And since the worm dies through boiling, that way with sinon, it won't pass through the cloth during the straining anymore. So just to explain this last point, well, we mean that if they developed in a jar but didn't come out, to explain a halakhic concept. So many things in halacha, let's say, for example, put tzitzis on a four-cornered garment. I think we discussed this once before, but not recently. So if you magnify a corner large enough, it'll end up being rounded. Right? We also know that you can't have cracks, let's say in the letters and mezuzahs or something. But if you magnify the ink enough, the letter, there will be a crack. Might be microscopic, but you'll see it. Likewise, we're not allowed to eat bugs and different things, but every time we take a bite of something or we breathe in, there's little microscopic organisms that come in our mouth. So does that mean maybe we can't eat anything or we can't breathe? What's going on? How does it work? So for practical halakhic issues, the definition of something that exists or its concern exists is, can it be seen with the naked eye? Something that's microscopic is not a halakhic issue. Now, even though they didn't have microscopes, not just because of that, we see in the Talmud, they understood that certain things were microscopic, that certain bugs laid eggs that were microscopic. We certainly see it in Zohar and different things, Kabbalah. But a microscopic egg, very tiny bug, and the egg that lays is microscopic, it's like it's not there because we're only concerned with what can be seen with the human eye. Once we start worrying about small and what can be seen with the human eye, you can't eat anything. There's microscopic organisms on everything. You can't breathe. So we have a rule. If a microscopic egg was laid and what hatches out of it is also microscopic, and then only later it grows into something that can be seen with the human eye. And I'm talking about it couldn't be seen before because of its size, not camouflage. Right? A lot of bugs you can't see because it's camouflaged, but really they're big enough to see. We're talking about something that you can't see due to its size. So let's say this happened inside a fruit. A egg got laid inside a fruit. The larva hatched. And when it first hatched, it was microscopic, and only later it grew to the size you could see, inside an apple. If that bug never leaves the apple, it's considered part of the apple because its existence, halachic existence, developed in the apple. And so there's not a kashrus issue with eating if you took a bite of the apple and ate the bug. There's another issue about shaksu, of not being disgusting by eating the bug, but it's not a kashrus issue. So what we're talking about here with the vinegar, since the type of worms they're talking about came from microscopic eggs, and they developed when they first were born, it was microscopic, and as long as they're still in the vinegar, it's like they're in their original existence. So that's why it's better to it's worse to makes a larger problem if we put it through a filter and they leave the vinegar and then go back in. Yeah, Mordechai.
Would that be similar to like with blue cheese? Like the
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I could tell you honestly, I don't know exactly how they make it, but they do have certain bug. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Look, I do like all kinds of different cheeses, but I got to tell you, I sometimes go to the supermarket. Obviously, they don't have, well, at least where I live, they don't have them kosher ones. But maybe I'm just uncultured. But I see these cheeses that they look like they have varicose veins and they smell like my dirty socks. I don't have any inclination to eat them. But obviously people do. I always wouldn't make it. So if I'm the uncultured one and I am not appreciating it properly and other people have enjoyed it, please don't take it as a criticism. Please enjoy all the kosher cheeses available. But and having, I mean, today the Swiss cheese, they drill, but to have a cheese that, even though it's not necessarily a kosher issue, but you just know worms are crawling through it, making all these holes. It just makes it so unappetizing to me. Maybe I'm too
Rabbi?
sensitive about what I eat. Yes.
In your discussion of vinegar, a lot of places they advise for digestive purposes that one take a spoonful of vinegar that so-called has the quote unquote mother, meaning that it has developed a type of, I guess, fermentation, you would call it, that it has within it. It's not mold, but it's it something has grown within it, not worms that you could see with your eye, but it clouds the vinegar a little bit. And this is, I believe it has a hechsher on it, because I bought it, the Bragg's amino acid vinegar, and it's advised to use that to clean off things like raspberries or blueberries or blackberries, which otherwise could have little bugs themselves, that vinegar supposedly alleviates. What would be the status of that? Are we allowed to
Well,
take
I mean,
that kind of?
if you say it's a hechsher it's a vinegar with a hechsher, then I guess if it's a good hechsher, it's I mean, you just want to make sure it's not something that developed in a post production. Like I guess these worms, in the vinegar can come in post production. But if it's something, I mean, I'm not sure exactly the product you're referring to.
Bragg's amino acid
Yeah,
vinegar, quote unquote, raw, unfiltered with the mother, they call it.
yeah. So I apologize. I'd like to be able to answer people's questions, but I believe that we'll try and look into it during the week.
So
And
the worms that develop in the vinegar would not be kosher if we can see them. Is that what it is?
So these
Because
worms talking about is post production. Look, it's spoiled. It didn't
Oh,
spoil. I
yes.
guess vinegar's
Yeah.
still good, but something's laid something into it, and it's
Oh, that would be different.
yeah. All right. Well, wish everyone a wonderful week. And
Thank you, Rabbi.
look
Thank
forward to
Thank
seeing
you,
you around next
Rabbi.
week, God willing. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.